Hi everyone, Dead Battery here, and thank you for joining me on my channel. Today's video is going to be an HDMI out mod on a handheld. Since my husband decided to start playing through our extreme backlog of video games and also play games on systems that we've never owned before until now, and we only own because I've been repairing them. And every time you get a new system to fix, you have to buy a game to test, just in case. So I thought it would be a good idea to try and find HDMI out or AV out for handhelds, since we have quite a few of them. And there are some really good games for them. However, we can't really figure out how we would record us playing the games if there was no way to plug them in. Now I know with certain systems they plug into other systems, or you can emulate. However, we didn't see a point in emulating since we already own most of the handhelds and or the games we want to play. So this first HDMI out I'm going to do is going to be on a Game Boy Color. So let's take apart this Game Boy Color and let's add an HDMI out mod onto it, and let's see if we can get it working on the TV. I did get this from Retro Game Repair Shop. This was one of 3 that I was able to buy from them. The kit came with the wires, a ribbon that goes from the original Game Boy motherboard to the new screen, a couple stickers that go over top the motherboard so you don't zap anything, the sticky part that goes around the inside of the case to hold the screen down, and then here is the screen with the new motherboard. This is the Game Boy I'm going to sacrifice, and I only say that because you are going to have to do some trimming. To take Game Boys apart, it is really easy. However, you are going to need the Y screw bit. There are 2 screws inside the battery enclosure and then 4 more. And they may not be as easy to get out, but if you lift the back panel off, you can just dump them out. Now I can take the ribbon off at the top. And then you'll have to switch your bit to a Phillips head, but there's just 3 more screws that hold the motherboard down to the rest of the shell. Luckily this system didn't look too dirty, but I'm going to remove everything so it's easier to work with the shell. If you've never had to do a screen repair or take the original screen out of a Game Boy, it's pretty easy. You just hold it in your hands and flex it back and forth, and you'll hear it give a little bit, and you should be able to lift it out. There are instructions on Retro Game Repair Shop's website that you can follow. There was something that said to trim all these off. I haven't had an issue with these, but the first one I clipped off, you can't see it, but it flung up and hit me right in the face underneath my eye. So I thought it was a good idea to get my goggles for this. So safety first, everybody. We don't want any damage to your faces. So just be careful. But now I'm just gonna hold my finger over top each of these as I trim them, but I still have my goggles on just in case. Now that all of those are off, you can see that it is pretty flat. The next step is trimming off this whole entire outside area from your shell, if you have an original one. If you don't, and you bought a modification that already has everything trimmed or doesn't have this area, you don't need to do this at all. This is just for anybody that has an original one. Once that's all off, just to make it flat, I'll also take my Dremel around and just kind of smooth it out, because sharp edges can cause issues for things you didn't think of until you put it all together. Once everything is smooth, I am going to put the new sticker down that's going to hold the screen in place. The instructions do tell you how to put this screen in there, and where you want to line it up. Next is going to be the motherboard, and there are a couple points that you have to solder down. Since I'm using an original one and I'm not changing out the original motherboard either, there's buttons that you don't need to solder. I wish I would have paid attention so I could have gotten the other motherboard, but there was really no point. It's just one that has some RGB lights on it, and I thought it would be fun. And then I'm going to put each of these wires down first, and this is what it looks like in the end. You can see that it has 7 new wires attached to it. You'll have to do some more trimming for the top of the case because the motherboard won't sit down against the back screen because of the HDMI out port. This was a little more difficult than I'd like to say it was. I trimmed it down as best I could and then just took the Dremel at it. In the end, it does sit in there. It just looks like it was hand done, which it was. It was done by me, so it's not perfect, but it'll work for what it needs to be used for. Now I can go ahead and solder each of the wires onto the original Game Boy motherboard. The first one is your power wire, and that one's the only one that goes around to the front. Look at directions, it does tell you exactly which spot to solder it down to. The B button, the A button, select your ground. And the last 2 wires are marked as L and R, and they go to part of the wheel which controls the volume. I'll leave a link in the description to this mod and the directions. I did decide to peel off the front Game Boy Color screen because it was a little scratched and put the new one I got on. And there was an option to trim down lower so that you could see the Game Boy symbol light up, and I didn't have that board, so I didn't do the trim. I didn't realize that it was a lot bigger. So you can see that I have a lot of yellow showing now, and that was probably a pointless thing to do, but now you know from my experience that if you do this mod and you don't get the other modifications, you probably don't need this. Don't forget to put the sticker they provide on the back of the screen to prevent any shorts to the HDMI board, as well as the one that goes on top of the HDMI board so it doesn't short out against the original motherboard. I didn't trim any of these down this time, but now I'm wondering how I'm supposed to get this in the case. But we're gonna give it a try, and I'm just gonna use Kapton tape to hold everything down. I'm gonna try to put these wires in some way that I don't think they're going to get in the way. If you're doing this, maybe shorten your wires a little bit so it'll be easier to fold into place. I don't know if shorter wires would have been easier because then you wouldn't really have as much room to get them out of your way. However, the really long ones kind of got bulky, so you had to be careful where you put them so that when you put it back together, there wasn't extreme pressure on everything else. Back of the shell, the HDMI port actually also came up to that shell, so I had to trim around it a little bit, and I did make the hole a little too big, but it's still gonna work once again for the purpose. One of the last things you have to attach, which has always been my hardest part, is these touch buttons. I just put them both at the top, so I kind of got them in between where the screen was and stuck them down. But they're always so sticky, and I always feel like I'm gonna bend one the wrong way and it's not gonna work. But luckily, this time it wasn't that bad. So once everything is good to go, you can put your 3 screws to hold the motherboard down, and then the 6 screws on the back. And we're gonna add the batteries and give it a test. And here's the screen, and it turns on, and it looks really nice. And here is all of the brightness as well as the color change for the screen. Here is the HDMI. It's a mini on one end and then the regular HDMI on the other end. So I know that was a pretty simple mod to do. I think this modification is something that a beginner can 100% do if you wanted to screen capture and record your Game Boy games instead of doing an emulator. This was a really quick and easy one, and I did enjoy this modification, but I was a little disappointed at how long the wires were, and I know that was just me. I could have trimmed them down. I just feel like I do that a lot, and instructions don't always say to do that. So I'm always worried that I'm doing something I'm not supposed to. But let me know in the comments if this is a modification you would do, or let me know if you would trim these wires down to be a little shorter. There was one other wire that came with it, and it was a lot shorter than the other ones, about half as short. I'm not too sure what that was supposed to go to. I might have to do a little digging and look to see if there's something I missed, or if it came with an extra wire for just in case I decided to do the RGB modification. So now we have a Game Boy that can HDMI out to the TV without anything else in between. So now we can play our Game Boy games on original hardware without having to put it into the GameCube. That's an option we have, where some people may not have that option of the GameCube connector to play games. This does leave us with an extra Game Boy Color, but as I mentioned, this one's just going to be used for when we want to record the games we're playing. If you are just starting out with mods and this is something that interests you, I'd say give this one a go. If you're uncomfortable with the really small wires, just breathe and take your time. It's a really quick solder down to all the areas, and I think you'd definitely be able to do this. They're not the only company that carries this mod. This is just the one that I picked for this video. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're looking forward to the rest of the HDMI out mods I have, because I have a couple more, and I'm excited to see how they all fit into all of our handhelds. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, share with your friends, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks. Bye!